Hey everybody. So here in the first round of the NHL playoffs, we have seen 4 teams that have lost game 1 on their home ice. And Tampa Bay did it, Boston did it, Nashville did it, and Winnipeg did it. They all went into their particular series as a higher seed, home ice advantage, and they immediately gave it away and blew game 1 on home ice. Certainly, that's not something that is unheard of in the NHL, and we've seen plenty of every year somebody loses on home ice pretty early on in a series. Every year someone loses a game 1 on home ice, but this year 4 teams did it, and I think it's really important for those teams how they respond to that, how you play in game 2. And can you even the series, or do you end up just completely losing home ice advantage and blowing another game is really important. And we've seen really different responses from these teams. Really 4 different responses, but 2 differences especially. And that's the way that Tampa Bay and Winnipeg responded and the way that Nashville and Boston responded. So after blowing game 1 on home ice, Tampa Bay comes out and just gets blown out, steamrolled in game 2, also on their home ice. Obviously not the response that you would want if you're a Tampa Bay Lightning fan. I thought game 2 was going to be really important for them to come back. And game 1 was close. They took the 3-0 lead, and they lost by a goal. That was a 4-3 game. It's not like they got destroyed in game 1. I thought Tampa was going to come back out and say, no, you are not taking this series from us. We kind of took our foot off the gas in game 1 and ended up blowing the lead. We're not going to let that happen again. And I thought Tampa was going to come out and absolutely hammer Columbus in game 2, and it was the exact opposite. Columbus just took it to the Lightning from the drop of the puck and ended up winning 5-1. So that is the worst kind of response you could possibly have if you're Tampa Bay. And I am legitimately worried about the Lightning moving forward. They might be out in the first round. That's really unbelievable to think about given the regular season they had. 62 wins, President's Trophy, a lot of people's Stanley Cup pick. And they very well could be out in the first round. But to not even show up in the game after losing game 1 at home, to not even show up in game 2 is just downright disgraceful, and that's what Tampa Bay did. So that is the worst kind of response that you could have in game 2 for if you lose game 1 at home. The other team that continued to lose at home is Winnipeg. Now, Winnipeg's game was close. They lost 4-3 to St. Louis, and both of those games that Winnipeg lost at home were 1-goal games. So it's not like Winnipeg is not showing up or, playing really poorly the same way that the Lightning just, got destroyed in game 2. Winnipeg is playing fine, but they're not doing enough to win the game. St. Louis is doing enough to take the win. And now Winnipeg also finds themselves down in an 0-2 hole, heading out onto the road after losing both games at home, games 1 and 2 at home. And again, if you're Winnipeg and you lose game 1 at home on home ice, a 2-1 real close game, you're not in a terrible position. It's not like you got blown out. But you need to do what it takes to win the second game. You need to make sure you come out of that second game with a 1-1 series tie. And Winnipeg just didn't do enough to win. Every time they'd score, St. Louis would just take the lead back. And Winnipeg would tie it up, and then St. Louis would take the lead back. And when it came down to it, St. Louis took the lead back in the third period, and Winnipeg could not get another goal and ended up losing 4-3. And that's not as bad of a game as Tampa Bay played, obviously, but still, Winnipeg did not do enough to win. And when, I would be really upset if I was a Jets fan, for them to come out and drop both games on home ice. That's just, that second game, they did not respond well enough. They played okay. It was a close game. It's not like they didn't show up, but they just didn't do enough to get the win, and that's a problem. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, you have what Nashville and Boston did, and that is make sure that you come out with at least a 1-1 series tie. Make sure that if you're going to drop game 1 on home ice, that you make damn sure that you come out and win game 2. In Nashville, I mean, it was close. Nashville, they played a very, very tight game with Dallas yesterday. Went to overtime, ended up being a 2-1 Nashville win in overtime. They did what Winnipeg should have done, which is, in that close game, just do what it takes to win. Make sure you get the win. Both teams played well. Dallas certainly has nothing to complain about with their game 2 effort. Both teams played well, but Nashville did what it took to win, and that's what Winnipeg didn't do, and that's why Winnipeg is down 0-2, whereas Nashville is in a 1-1 series tie. And then the fourth team, Boston, last night, wow. Boston just came out with a whole other level of play, just shellacked the Maple Leafs. When it ended up 3-0, ended up winning 4-1, just destroyed, especially in the first period, just dominated and destroyed Toronto in the first period. And that is the best kind of response that you can have. If you're a team like Boston, who didn't even show up in game 1, should have just stayed in the locker room in game 1, they came out and were the exact opposite team in game 2, which is exactly what you needed them to be. And they came out and just hammered Toronto physically, took the early 1-0 lead, and then made it 2-0 at the end of the first period. And from that point on, that was the Bruins game. And that's exactly the kind of response. So you do what Nashville and Boston did, which is the appropriate response when you drop game 1 on home ice, is to come out and make sure that you win game 2 and do what it takes to win game 2. And then you have the Winnipeg and Tampa Bay response, which is to drop game 1 on home ice and then drop game 2 as well, which is just putting both of those teams in a very, very bad situation. And it's going to be really hard for either of them to move on now, because all the pressure is on them to go into a road environment and steal probably 2 wins. They probably need to win both road games to really get back in that series, because if they only get 1, then it's 3-1, and I mean, that is a tough hole to dig out of. It's not impossible, especially where, Tampa is a very good team, Winnipeg is a very good team. It's not impossible for them to come back from a 3-1 deficit, but that's a big hole that you do not want to find yourself in. So those are teams that are really looking to go on the road and take both games, and that's a very, very difficult thing to do. So, really those are 2 very different responses, and we've seen both of them in these playoffs, and really it's 4 different responses. You have Tampa Bay, who just gets blown out in game 2 with the worst response. No response, really. You have Winnipeg, who plays okay, but just doesn't do enough to win. Then you have Nashville, who doesn't dominate or anything, but in the end does what it takes to win. And then you have Boston, who just came out and destroyed Toronto and blew them out of the building, which is the best response. So Tampa Bay with the worst response, Boston with the best. Nashville did what it took to win, and Winnipeg just came up a little bit short. So, when you drop game 1 on home ice, that's never a good thing, but how you respond is, you don't lose a series in game 1. No team loses the series in game 1. You always have a chance to respond. It's a long series. You can make up for a game 1 loss. Boston and Nashville did what they had to do. Winnipeg and Tampa Bay did not, and now find themselves in big trouble. So, it's never a good thing to lose on home ice, but how you respond to that is very important. And already in these playoffs, we've seen very different responses from multiple teams. And you can either compound the problem and make things worse and go down 0-2, or you can make sure that you get that game 2 win, respond well, and get yourself right back in the series by tying it up. And that's what Boston and Nashville did. So that's pretty much what I got on that. I just want to talk about the different kinds of response games that we saw from all 4 teams that blew game 1 on home ice, and some were able to tie the series up. Some find themselves in big trouble. But With that, like, comment, share, subscribe, follow on social media. All those links are in the description. If you'd like to further support the channel, the links to our Patreon and merchandise store are in the description as well. Keep spreading the word about this channel. Let's keep this thing growing. Thank you very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll talk to you guys soon.